Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan, where we get it straight. This is part 2 with our featured guest, Pam Lads. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you. We've, of course, been sitting here for the whole week, just waiting for this to fire up again.
Exactly, right. We've got a lot of good stuff going on, and once again, you cover everything. NEK-TV is in there. You are like, how does it feel to be the camera lady?
Weird sometimes. It's really interesting being a camera person because people don't notice you. So they say stuff in front of you that they don't expect to have been heard, and they don't see the person behind the camera. So a camera can be on somebody and the person may become aware of the camera, but they're never aware of the person. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So where you're really visible, you're invisible.
Yeah,
like
exactly. And for example, at council meetings,
Sure.
and you may remember some of this, you guys are all sitting up there on your thrones, which are not elevated, but it appears that they are.
I was at the lower chair.
Yeah, right. And the camera is on you, and something happens in the group, and then that motion is made, everything's continued. You guys start talking amongst yourselves, but the camera's still right there, and so am I.
Right.
Or whoever's filming it. It's really interesting, and the stuff that gets said and heard that I'm sure you're all unaware you say and hear.
Well, that's good.
It's good.
I mean, that's good, because we were talking about transparency, and
Right.
it should be hidden. Once you're there and it's on,
Right.
you're talking, it's public.
Absolutely, and so it should be.
Right. Like when I passed the armory contract to
Yes.
the current person who took the mayor role and said, you're going to need this, watch for the emails with the corrections that are going to be needed. Right, so that's on tape.
It's on tape.
Right, which contradicts little editorials that are out
Yes.
there. So this is good. I mean, so...
Yes. And there will always be editorials.
I know, and the editorials
And
are there.
hallucinations.
Hallucinations that go with the editorials,
Yeah.
right.
Bizarre.
But I do want to talk a little bit about that, because I have been, inquiries, questions asked, by a lot of, the citizens and,
Right.
a lot of...
You live in town.
I do. All right. And I like living in town and being able to go out.
Yes. That's the point of living here.
And so, but of course, I'm always there with my constituent base. I will always, people, I do have a constituent base for the whole state because
Yes.
I am commissioners. And so that doesn't, when you run for a local election and you remove yourself from there, you don't
Yeah.
lose your constituent base if you are
right.
still an appointed or elected official in
Right.
some other capacity. And, but I was asked several times about why would people settle a lawsuit? And so I thought that could be something I did want to bring up, because there are a lot of good reasons to settle it,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of wrong reasons
Yeah.
to settle it. Most people, the majority of people, and I would say like 90% of lawsuits probably settle just before court.
Right.
Because
Money.
money from one is a cost factor.
Yes.
However, the big reason is that the plaintiff usually is concerned that the ruling by a trier of fact, a real judge, won't go in their favor. So they're willing
Right.
to settle. What you need to be careful of, and what the issues are with, say, Newport, is who is doing the settling. Because remember, the lawsuit was brought prior to the new council, while council members were on the council,
Right.
like Alfred Chase and Charbonneau, okay, we're still part of that. The person now who is going to be doing decision making is not familiar with the facts, and also has a different mode of operation than, whatever, which
Right.
just happens with leadership. They all come in
course.
with their own style.
Of course.
However, there are other reasons why lawsuits settle. So a big one is that, of course, they, by getting a declaratory judgment, which is just a clarification of a
Right.
legal position.
But it's a big word.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But the key is it's so that the person's storyline can have merit.
Right.
And if you have somebody who's doing the settling, say for the city or leading that, and that person knows that they have to go through depositions or interrogatories, and they are fearful
Right.
of their own credibility. For example, it's open. Questions are open.
Right.
Like, have you ever been addicted? Have you ever been arrested? Have you
Sure.
ever been in litigation? And all of that's open. And people are not savvy litigious-wise.
Right.
They are fearful, so
Of
they
course.
want to settle.
Yes. And most of
which
us are not savvy litigation-wise.
That's right. And that is, though, harmful, say, for the city.
Yeah.
And also, when you have attorneys for the city who also pretty much have pending conflicts because their
Yeah.
own attorneys were referenced in this alleged non-frivolous
Right.
lawsuit, okay, because the attacks are so continual. And you have somebody who is a licensed attorney who's not practicing, so that person says, and just is using this as like a field day to
Right.
play lawyer.
Sure.
And so you have all of these very serious issues. And I have been informed that there are probably going to be interveners coming in. And what that means is that people are going to be filing motions to intervene in this lawsuit because they believe that there will be damaging, reputational, and people don't know the facts, so they want to be parties to this lawsuit, which is going to change
Wow.
the whole dynamic. Okay, so, if you have 1 to 3 or 4 people filing motions to intervene, this little settlement may not happen the way the fearful ones want it
Wow.
to happen.
In fact, it could open many, many cans of crawling things.
That's right, because
Wow.
there will be, if people are doing non-factual statements, like, for example, the city allegedly settled on one point with a statement of impropriety, which we talked about
Right.
last round.
Yeah.
But there were emails out there
Yeah.
that weren't even looked at that clearly stated that the city attorneys gave specific directives and legal advice and wrote the script
Yeah.
for what they settled. And now
Changed their minds?
Changed their minds, or
Yeah.
the council led by the current mayor was told to do A, B, or C. But you need to look at documents. You need to look at files before you can intelligently or informed make these decisions. So this whole, in my opinion now, it's just turned into nothing but political silliness.
Sounds as though it's going to be long, drawn out, and expensive.
But there are other issues out there too. We have the A&R potential lawsuit. We have the Capella lawsuit. So
That one really needs to get.
But we have the
sorted
same
out.
person
Yeah.
and council who are going to be looking at this, and how do you get them up to par if you don't read the files?
Right.
I mean, how do you not read the information when you are the only person in control?
And how do you have lawyers changing their minds without that being part of a discussion?
Right.
And maybe that would be part of a discussion behind closed doors, an executive session, but I would expect it to be public in other ways.
Of course. And the bottom line is, if you're going to be the person going into mediation or going into settlement, you can't do it out of your own fear.
Right.
You can't do it without understanding all of the facts. You can't do it because you just want to do this
Yeah.
kumbaya, everybody love one another. These
Yeah.
are serious situations.
Right.
And it needs to be stopped. And using the platform of I just don't like anybody who says anything that I don't like, and they didn't keep the person I wanted to be the city manager who's my girlfriend or whatever, so I'm going to bring a lawsuit style. I mean, this is the appearance of what's going on. And if you look at the emails, it's obvious. So the bottom line is, that's the type of situation that should be addressed. And so if you'll think also, it was a declaratory judgment that was asked for, which specifically made it the type of lawsuit that the insurance carrier for the city wouldn't cover. So you couldn't go to the insurance company to deal with it unless there was a change in the request. So you had to pay city fees.
Wow.
Okay, but if you recall also, the plaintiff was a schoolmate of one of the city attorneys and just likes to banter and play with lawyers.
Yeah.
And, if you don't have your own client base and you're not out there practicing law, this is, if I can remember correctly, the court of public
Opinion,
whatever. Right. And it's obvious, come every meeting and practice law and, but do it as, I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
But yet I'll do my CLEs and make sure I keep an active license.
Yeah.
But so what's your thought? You're there, you're behind the camera. And it's always the same MO. Always going back to whoever doesn't like who I like or agree with what I agree, research of attack. What do you see when you're back there? Do you catch that? Like, what do you see?
I think recently, so much of what's been happening is focused on fiscal stuff.
Okay.
Both water and sewer and general finances. And reality, the city's in a mess.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that.
I'm sure, and I'm no expert on any of that, and nor am I a lawyer, thank God.
Right, but you don't need to be an expert.
Right,
I mean, this affects all of
it. It is very confusing for those watching, presumably who watch the video later, and who are in the room, because it goes by really fast.
Right.
And there's not a lot of explanation, and you can't really ask for explanation. Can you explain some of the, quote, big words to me? Some of them are in common parlance, so you can understand those. But context is really different very often. So how do people who need to be informed so that they can be effective, because they're going to be asked to vote on some of this stuff that's happening, how can they know? How instead of waiting much further down the road and there has to be some kind of informational meeting, which will be to give people a lot more information, how can some of that be shared along the way?
So here's a question. The people should request or even set up their own public forum and tell the council they want them there and start to ask these questions. And even if the council doesn't show up, start to ask these questions in public, right? When questions are asked, if it's through email, copy the press. Copy, public officials, copy larger public officials.
Right. And I think that for that to happen, and I agree with you, that is a right and it can happen, but you have to take 20 steps further back.
Correct.
Because nobody in the last God knows how many years has had any education on what the rights and responsibilities are of citizens or how to get involved when you've lived in a community that's pretty paternalistic, to put it mildly, where the same old have ruled, and that's never been questioned, and other people have, if they have questioned, have either been patronized, patted on the head, or told to go away and stop being annoying.
Well,
it's
and
discouraging.
Further, it should be more discouraging because when we began, when there was a change over the past 2 years prior, and we started to open this up and
Yes.
identify the financial issues and how they needed to be dealt with, there's that undergrounds of, like you call it, the paternal, which started with former Mayor Beth Barnes, was really raised to a high visibility.
What happened there was appalling, and that's the only way that can describe it.
But that appears to be an underground of a certain group that continues that. And, they just weren't as effective, say, other than in the press or with their nonsensical stories, but not in stopping the movement of, say, when I took over the reign of Miss Barnes, which she would have made an excellent mayor, and continued with that council, and it was still an old guard council.
Yes, it was.
And, but there was some changes in movement of awareness because you couldn't deny the facts.
Right.
So once, and we had good Councilman Clark Curtis there who was wanting facts, and people were looking at what was going on.
Right.
So right now we identified all of those issues with the water and sewer. We identified the use of funds, the borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, contracts that were signed inappropriately by wrong people with no authority, going onto people's property, knocking down trees, costing the city $25,000.
That's happened more than once.
But I'm talking like seeing it happen. All of these things going on, and it comes out. But at the end of the day, it was very clear, at least from the recently prior council, that it was time to stop it.
Yes.
And it was not going to happen anymore. And we were not going to use those funds. And we did stop it. And that's why you're starting to see what the deficit really was.
It's whopping.
Which was no shock, because I think it was over $2 million when I went in there and said, hey, this needs to stop. And, started to meet with Pasumsic, and we started to. And
it's been going on for a really long time. It's not just new.
So what bothers me too is, and I was in there because you're supposed to be as the CEO, and Miss Barnes wanted to go in there as the CEO, and so
she was kicked out actively.
Oh, I know. I have the
That's
emails.
mind-blowing.
It was mind-blowing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But now you have somebody, you're paying somebody, you have auditors who identified and validated everything that we've said.
Right.
Okay, fixed with journal entries, all of the issues. And now you're paying the city's paying another IT accountant to come in and just reiterate everything that's already been said, because your CEO doesn't want to go in and do it, or doesn't understand how to put together financial statements. So it's just paying for the same statements to come to a position of, we still want to just take money and pay it down, which you were told to do way back.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're in the same exact position. And how are you going to pay it back? The bottom line is, the key is, you have to cut expenses. It's not just revenue driven.
And I think that's pretty clear.
But then
how do we do it?
Well, it's real simple.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, the bottom line is, you got to look at your different departments. So I know 2 departments that I was looking at, that we were looking at, and they're top heavy. Okay, and you need to bite the bullet, and you need to lower those monies or those people, or you need to reassess and say, this particular person is getting paid X amount of money and they're not doing their job, or the job as it now is, and
different.
so you need to go in there. And you need to cut those expenses. You don't just say, well, we'll refinance it this way, refinance it that way, put it on the citizens, as you say, don't have all the information.
Citizens have a fraction of the information.
And that's being fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not that citizens wouldn't like the information, they would, but it's really got to be in a form that's comprehensive and comprehensible.
Correct. Correct. So look at the Walmart funds, right? So now there's talk of using those Walmart funds, the economic development funds. The last council voted specifically at the request of council member at that time, Upford Chase, to specifically use those funds for the TIF analysis.
Right.
And those funds were designated specifically for that. Okay, and it was stopped, the prior misuse of funds being taken out of ARP. Okay,
Right.
I could not believe that.
Yeah, I
one.
know.
Okay.
That one shocked me.
Right?
Whoa.
And to use these funds inappropriately, and now they're already designated where White and Burke has been informed that those funds are there for them, for this specific economic development analysis on the TIF, and now you want to take monies from there. And, you're using funds to pay executive director salaries of NDD, and, you got that requirement that, you can't not pay that, and it's for the executive director. That's specifically what it says. And so how are you going to pay it back? If you can't pay this, okay, the only way you pay it is first to eliminate the expenses so you know what your true bottom line is and what your target break even is. So how do you feel? And I know Ann Cirillo turned around and was very specific, and she was 100% correct.
Yeah.
Economic development, but they're also designated now. So how do you feel about that with the Walmart funds? And you're watching the people when you're filming.
Right. And on one hand, it's clearly disturbing that a decision gets made and then it's being unmade, but how is it being unmade?
Well, it's clearly just flippant.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, there was no, I didn't see, unless you were there and you heard something different, was there, the council voted on this, it was done for White and Burke, just like the last time when I went into White and Burke, when former Mayor Monette did A, B, and C, not saying anything bad or good, it was just a matter you wanted to change something. I went to the administration, we brought it to the public, we explained why the $40,000 was being pulled back and what it was allowed to be used for.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, this is not a full decision yet, is my understanding. So there's
the paper says
I think all of us need to take a more skeptical glance at both of our local newspapers, however we choose to describe them, and really ask some questions, because sometimes it makes my hair stand on end, because I think I was sitting there and that is not what happened. But interpretation, of course, is open to many things. And even though comments and statements can be corrected, and I assume that you're reacting to something that was in today's paper, which of course I haven't read yet, because this is early morning, and I don't get that paper till later. But that decision isn't fully made. I mean, there's another council meeting to come up, a special one.
Notice
this week.
A lot of special meetings.
Yeah, and I seem to remember a lot of flack that was thrown at a previous mayor for having special meetings.
I remember that too.
I bet you do. You were on the receiving end of a lot of that
special
debris.
Meetings because we wanted to hurry up and fix whatever we could as we identified things, and then it was stop the special meetings. But of course it was, if you ate tofu, don't eat tofu. If you, it didn't matter what you did. It was just attack, just attack, just attack. But keep going. Tell me what you were talking about.
So there are a lot of things on the table, but there are still a lot of questions and not a lot of space yet to ask those questions, because there's a council meeting, there's a fiscal task force, and the task force is asking questions, good ones.
And where are they answered? How are they answered?
Well, some of them are getting answered and discussed in the room, because then the task force members go get the information.
From who?
From the city treasurer or from other departments, and they're doing some pretty interesting investigations. Who knows? I don't know if all of the information is there or if they're getting enough information. But they're not mincing words, and I like that.
But it shouldn't take that long to figure out what's already figured out.
Well, yeah. But a lot of us,
a
lot of us are playing catch up.
About community interaction.
Yes.
I was like forums as much as I possibly could. I wanted people to interact.
Yeah.
But not for a delay tactic.
Right.
Okay.
No, I get it.
Not to make it give appearances of community involvement. Because these people are sincere, I believe, on the task force.
Yes, they
I
are.
believe
They
the
are.
people who are on there are sincere.
Absolutely.
But don't
And
control it
hardworking.
but don't make it a game. I mean, the bottom line is you already have the answers. You know what the issues are. Look in the files. Okay. Talk to the auditors. I mean, it's all there. So now it's decision-making time.
Right. It is.
And if you yourself are not providing the information to the people on this task force, how fair are you?
Right.
Because I truly believe that and I don't know them all, but I believe when people do sign up for them, they're earnest.
They are.
And they're enthusiastic.
And they have knowledge bases that the
right.
rest of us don't have. I have no fiscal background. Zero.
But you're also not ignorant. So you've
True.
seen enough, and if somebody hands you a document that says you can't use these monies for anything, you're
Yeah,
going
I
to understand that it says you can't use these monies for anything.
Right. And I may then ask a question, well, can that be changed? Is that carved in concrete? Is there a way, is this necessary to do it this way? And B, what's a way to do it that's both moral and legal? And moral's important.
Moral
it really
is very important. Ethics, which we've talked about.
Yes.
But talk a little bit more. You've been there with it. Let's look at this financial task force. What kinds of questions did you ask? If you recall.
Well, it's not as simple as that. I mean, they really have done a deep dive, which I know you did, into the budget and looking at what is there. But as you know, it was really hard to access information. How do you find out which accounts that appear to exist have money in them or don't have money in them? And if they're still there and they don't have money in them, why is that? Are they just hanging out there because someday they may get refilled? Or are they hanging out there as a distraction? So there's been a lot of clearing and gathering of information in that way.
So that is all in the files. I mean, seriously. I mean, the journal entries, you could look at the journal entries. You can go in there and look at the bank reconciliations, and you can see which ones were on paper. How many times did I go into these meetings where I would ask the department heads to show
Right.
up, and the DPW would turn around and say, "Oh, it's on paper, and that would just
Make you nuts.
make me crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so you knew all along that the money was on paper and wasn't there.
But you did.
No, but I'm saying
Yeah.
the department had the one specifically say for a specific file or a
Yeah.
specific account. They knew this was not a secret.
Right.
Okay, the treasurer made them totally aware that when it was on paper, it was not there. So that's what we uncovered.
Right.
So now reconciliations are real simple. They're done. So the bank reconciliations are there. The bank has this information. So what I'm trying to find out is for the sake of the task force, where they're working so hard, how are they not getting this information?
That's a very good question. And clearly as I listen to you talking, and you're talking about information that is sitting out there, presumably collated in some form, and yet doesn't appear to be available, or the task force hasn't had their hands on it, or not that they've said. Obviously, that's a question for me, going back to say, hey guys, have you seen X, Y, and Z? Because there's a mismatch here in what I'm hearing from you and what I'm seeing there. But in a lot of ways, they're reinventing the wheel.
Correct.
Which is sad.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is, task force, whatever they're given, is not privileged. I mean,
No.
It's there. They're asking for information. So
And they're going in digging. I mean, they're spending a lot of time.
They're only being handed, apparently, information that's scattered out there. I mean, the bottom line is the CEO is total control of all of the city's documents, charged with that as the custodian of those documents with the treasurer, okay, and I know all of my prior emails, which were not deleted, were preserved.
You may have to explain that reference at some point.
Okay, were preserved. Okay,
Yes.
were totally under the CEO's, mayor's custody and control. Okay, and the attorneys are aware, and they have been.
And they have
there.
access.
They have access, total access. That the CEO is giving them, the mayor is giving them. So I would have thought that every single document, because you just could search very easily for your subjects within there, because that's how they're identified with the attachments. It's very easy to look up the history of what was going on, plus the physical files that were left and assorted for the transition over. So the key is, who is giving the task force the information?
Well, a lot of it is coming from NEMRIC, because the NEMRIC system,
so there you go.
That is bizarre, bizarre.
So if it's coming from NEMRIC, it's only coming from the people who input. So it's coming mainly from the Treasurer's Department, what they input. And
I know.
all of the information is just data entry within a defined limited scope based on the user's ability.
Yeah, well, and that's an important phrase,
That
the
is the
user's
phrase,
ability. Because clearly, I mean, going way back, there have been some serious mistakes made where information got put, figures, money got put in the incorrect place, which has certainly contributed to some of the mess we're in now.
Well, put in a certain place, whether it be mistakes or choices,
Right.
or approved choices, because you have to remember too, a lot of times you go historically back, there were council meetings and votes to do some of those placements of funds.
Yes, there were.
Or there was your city manager thinking they had authority,
Right.
which totally contradicts the charter.
However, that was the state of play, and council members are people who are really interested in civic duty. They want to be good. They want to help. There's very little training for people who are interested. They haven't had it all the way along growing up.
Right, we started to train them when we came in.
Yeah, but that's too little too late.
Well, of course.
And they have day jobs, and they're sitting on the council, and they're suddenly getting buried under a lot of really ugly stuff. And how do you even swim to the surface in that to then be able to get an overview, to step back? It's hard.
You do it with your CEO, who's charged specifically with the finances of the city.
Yeah.
That's where you go, and your CEO needs to be in there looking at those financial documents, creating the appropriate financial statements, making those journal entries. Of course, they have auditors, they're professionals out there. I mean, they're licensed professionals.
Am I supposed to cheer for that? Because
Well,
that
you should cheer
truly
more for
hasn't.
that. Well, it's also their auditors versus advisors.
Yeah.
Different things.
Yeah.
But still, it's your CEO who is communicating with them, which changes the audit. Like when I went in there, that audit was an entirely different animal than the previous audits, because they work with the person who is in there providing the information.
Right, and some of
there
that
were over
before.
65 journal entries. That is material.
Yes.
Okay, so when you're given that and you have that type of an audit with detailed footnotes, the more appropriate situation would be, should you be bringing in as a consultant your advisors of a firm like that who could work that way. So, and people don't really understand audit, the purpose of an audit. They think, I've heard that excuse by the, say the treasurer, well, we were audited. That is not what an audit is. Like, it's not like, oh, the audit said it's okay, we could do this. That's not what the audit says.
We certainly had a memorable experience at a city council meeting where the then mayor took the volumes of audits, threw them up in the air so that they crashed down on the table. It was intended to intimidate the rest of us peasants.
I see.
But it was to say that he really supported what the auditors were doing, and we're going, it makes no sense.
Yeah, right.
No sense.
Right.
No sense.
So, as I said, entirely different thing. And we've gone through the person who brought this litigation declaratory judgment request.
Right.
Okay, the same nonsense with I want a forensic audit, and then pretending that wasn't asked for a forensic audit, and then pretending the mayor denied it. Well, it was a whole council discussion and a council vote, not a mayoral vote. But, just not knowing terminology, not, just wanting storylines. But right now, the city's in a financial problem.
Right. How do we fix it?
How do you fix it?
How do we fix it?
How do you fix it? So let's look at, say, the treasurer's department. You look at the money being spent on the people there. You look at who's doing the work, who has the ability to do the work. You look at whether or not it's too top heavy. You look at how they're being paid. You look at their statutory obligations, and you make a decision whether it is something you need to bite the bullet on or not, and you need to revamp that. You need to cut costs. You look at DPW, same thing. You look at all of your departments.
Right.
And, the bottom line is we need to make some decisions.
Right.
We did what we needed to do. We were paying interim city managers hundreds of thousands of dollars for what? And so that stopped. But so now you have to cut costs.
Right.
There needs to be some freezes.
And today we're at June the 30th. Tomorrow is the new fiscal year,
There you go.
according to the city, which is sort of interesting timing for this discussion.
So
Probably not a coincidence on your part.
not at all.
Mine, I was clueless. But yeah.
But welcome to Straight
Thank you.
Talk. Vermont.
Welcome to your world, right?
Right. But you're so knowledgeable. Once again, I am fascinated by your being behind the camera, because you're also watching. You're getting to see body language,
Yes.
right? You're getting to kind of identify if all the council members were informed, if one council member had a discussion and was told to kind of vote a certain way. You get to see that. What do you pick up?
You see dynamics, obviously, and so though do people in the audience. And what you also see is communication between council members and those who are sitting out there as citizens, listening, who may be there for many different reasons. There are people who are genuinely concerned and who really want a participatory way of getting into this.
I think that's so true. I think that's more true than not.
Absolutely.
I really do. I think that, at least from the citizens that I have spoken to, which is a great number, they are sincere, they are earnest, and they have good ideas.
Yeah, they do.
And like you say, if they had some of the real facts, they would really be able to offer some viable solutions, whether they be short-term or long-term, but at least would not be just this kick the can down the road and we'll do the same thing. We'll redefine it, but it's exactly the same thing.
I love this rebranding crap.
Yeah, let's rebrand. Right.
Yeah.
Let's rebrand the debt as debt.
Yeah.
Let's rebrand the obligation as obligation.
Our creative use of words sometimes is interesting, sometimes appalling.
Right, but
Yeah.
but so there you are. So this has gotten to the point where it's not revenue driven anymore.
No.
They ran out. Revenue has stopped,
gone.
or the timing of revenue is not going to change. Okay, and so you're dealing right now with what is your other option?
Right.
Okay,
And
I've
either you
heard
win the
some-
lottery, which requires buying a ticket.
which means money.
Correct.
Or
Exactly.
you cut expenses.
Right. Or you look at where you can legitimately raise expenses, and water sewer is struggling with that right now because there is not enough income, and we're all aware of that.
Which has been historically going on since, what, 2017? We've had this issue.
Right. But somehow it never got
No, it never got
fixed.
It never got fixed, and we explained that in
Yes.
a written article. I mean, there's a file
Oh, yeah.
there with all of the minutes that clearly identifies it with calculations, et cetera, going on there.
Yeah, and any money that was sitting in a little pile in that account has disappeared long ago. So the only choice there, and I think we're all aware of that, is to raise it. The question is how to do it. And does it get done in one big loop, or does it get done incrementally? As people figure out it still isn't enough, which
But-
is where the
But
city is
that
now.
question was already addressed last year.
It
And
was, but
and
it wasn't fixed.
Well, because it was time to move into that, just
Yeah.
here's the calculation, and this is the number you need, not this is the number I want.
Right.
And that's always been the issue. The issue's always been, okay, we moved from Peter to Paul or wherever we did, and now this is what I want.
Right.
And this is a city. It's not what I want,
Right.
okay? It's what is realistic, what is feasible, what is there, what is
Right.
equitable. And here's the calculation. And you don't just pay down something to continue at that high level inappropriate, and I say
Right.
inappropriate, okay, and that's just from what I believe, okay, to keep those expenses going.
Right.
Okay, you have to change that, because all you're doing is filling the gap again and then continuing it.
And then you're right back in the same
And keep giving raises
circuit,
out and keep
yeah.
purchasing,
No, it has to change,
That's
obviously.
correct.
And you can't get distracted by the red herrings of who's got a water meter and who doesn't.
Oh,
And there are good
that's-
reasons to have water meters in,
Right,
really
but
good
that's
reasons.
not the situation anymore.
No,
That's-
it's got to get fixed. And ditto for looking at the pipes that come into the house that the state is
But those are the
jumping.
storyline extraordinary
Of course,
distractions.
of course.
You still fix the number crunching. I mean, the number
Yes.
crunching is entirely different.
It's so easy to go off on those tangents. Though.
Well, that's the drama.
Of course.
And if you continue that storyline, which was there, as I said, through the city manager style versus the mayoral charter,
Yes.
it's entirely different. And the key right now is, what are they going to do? Because all I'm hearing is, well, we'll go and vote and do this, new way to cover it up, and now what?
Right.
It's over, you got your money, and you start
Yeah.
again?
Yeah, I think the city has reached the point where cover-up is impossible. I really hope
No,
that's
you're right.
true.
You're right. Well,
I
it's
think
always
this-
possible.
Yeah. There'd have to be an awful lot
It's
of
just not
people colluding.
sophisticated.
I
Yes.
don't see people colluding in the same way.
Yeah, well, I'm saying it's
And
not
that's-
sophisticated anymore,
right.
because that's all gone. That whole model government's gone.
And
so,
citizens are sick of it.
thank goodness.
Yes.
Thank goodness. And I'm hoping that we think we started to see that last year.
Yeah.
When they were being told this is an issue regardless of the distractions. They really believed, and I think they were aware. We were looking and trying to say, okay, this is an
Right.
issue, and there were things going on. I mean, right now, let's talk about the desire for this TIF.
Yes.
You've been talking about that. That's been discussion.
Yeah.
So from behind the scenes, what do you see there?
I see that sitting out there, a lot of big questions to ask about it. And it's not that I don't think there can be value in a TIF and what a TIF represents, whether this is the right time. But then the next question with that is there ever a right time? But when you're asking citizens to take on a lot more debt, there's got to be some consideration of, is this the right time? I mean, we're living in a world right now which is pretty ugly. It's not just local. I mean, Newport has lost a lot of its income because Canadians are not coming.
Right.
They're not coming because they don't like being talked to in the way they've been talked to. Good for them. I don't like it either.
Right.
And that, if we don't have the population coming in to support the stores and the restaurants and other businesses in the area, if we don't have the same exchange of trade, I mean, yes, Vermont is part of the United States, but Vermont and Quebec, in so many ways, are one
Joined at the hip.
community. Yeah, we really are literally joined at the hip. And our families here live on both sides of the border. We need to stop pretending that's not true and stop pretending that the stuff that's happening at a very different level doesn't impact on us very negatively. And that impacts on a TIF.
Of course it does. Now going to the TIF, I mean, you also, in order to get a TIF, okay, now there's the new TIF, the chip.
Yeah.
So, but it's a good concept, but you know, you also have to have your infrastructure in place.
Yes.
And so the city's going through this, kick the can down the road,
Yeah.
try to plug the dam. You don't have the infrastructure, you're not looking at the departments and revamping them to
Right.
make sure that if you did get a TIF, there would be appropriate financial monitoring.
Right.
Because there's nobody there who's doing this, and your CEO is supposed to be doing this. And so the bottom line is, if you don't have that, how are you going to get it approved? And it's
You're
a
not.
bit-
Clearly.
That's right. So you're taking these Walmart funds for this assessment. So is it appropriate? And it might be appropriate. Okay, rather than say we're going to borrow from the Walmart funds, just go in there and say we're going to cease using those funds now. First, we're not doing the TIF. Find out how much were actually spent already, what they were spent for, because they were not supposed to be spent to train NDD staff on how to do a TIF. They were supposed to be spent for Reiner Burke to do their
Right.
analysis of which area would be best for the TIF, which project, okay? And so maybe those funds should be used, but should those funds be used for paying down this debt, or should they be maybe used for the armory for economic development? Okay,
Right.
and the citizens should be participating in that. So
Right.
you can't just say, give me the money, I'm going to take this, and because you're doing
Right.
exactly the same thing that was being done all along.
Yeah.
And so, so TIFs are good if they are done within the appropriate guidelines and everyth's in place. For example, let's look at the infamous hole. Okay, there was a complete
Yeah.
analysis that I had done and gone through with the council on how the city had the ability to get strong control of that hole. So what's going on with that? Has it even been brought up?
Nope.
Nothing.
Haven't heard a word about that. And there's the same tired discussion on the street about what the city should do with the hole. But it's the same, well, you didn't listen because the city doesn't own the hole.
But in the analysis that I had
It could have-
done,
it could
would
have.
definitely
But that
taken-
never came to the table in a public forum. And
Which
it
it was supposed to. That was where
Yeah.
it was left, so that would be a definitely brought out at the next council
Yeah.
meetings. And it's been, but because it's in those files, but it was identified and discussed with the council. And so they're aware of it, and they're aware of the strengths and ways. So I'm
Right.
quite surprised that something so important and that had the time. I mean, I did spend the time on that because it was important to the citizens as well.
Right.
And to the economic development. of the city, that wasn't a top priority to go forward.
Clearly it wasn't.
It wasn't. But so right now,
And there's still some discussion about the state wanting to put the courthouse in there. But that's mostly on the street, I hear that discussion. And it's one I can think of as, please don't. We're then stuck with 2 more buildings.
yeah, that's been a discussion all
Yeah.
along, but please don't. I mean, even when the little group, the NDD group, went up to meet with commissioners and things just to try to sell them on their project, that was always. No discussions have changed,
Right.
But the key is, how do you do it with the way that's best for the city? And there is a legal analysis in there, and there was identification of what to do and negotiations that could have taken place and reasons why and how I could have done that, or the next person could do that.
And how do you decide what's good for the city? Who decides what's good for the city?
Well, what should be happening is your mayor, CEO, should be looking at those financials, turning around and saying, this is what is good for the city, and making those presentations to your council members, and then bringing it to the public. And that's pretty much the pattern that was going on last round.
Right.
And that's what
With
should be.
so many distractions because of somebody who felt it necessary to create distractions.
Well, right, because distractions and that nonsensical, city manager storyline. So the key there is, but it didn't stop the work.
No.
Okay, so the work was done regardless.
Right.
And so that's how it should happen. So that's all there. And from that, you would hope that the council could build on it or decide no, yes, no, whatever.
Yeah.
But at least bring it out there.
Right.
And the key there is, you had phenomenal lawyers do that analysis. You had our other law firm, who is economic development specialists, were the ones who did
Are they even involved anymore?
well, only when the mayor reaches out to them to use them, as opposed to, and they were involved in a lot of these issues, financial issues.
Right, I'm sure.
But, then the key is, who are you using for what?
Right.
And the choice of the mayor to use the longer term lawyers for this lawsuit, who I believe has conflicts. There are many conflicts.
I think that's pretty clear, actually.
And as I said, interveners coming in will identify that if they do file those intervener motions. But
Is that a good thing or a bad thing,
it could
by
be
the
an
way?
excellent thing for. It'll be a bad thing for the current, say, mayor's decision to I just want to settle this and stop anybody from hating one another. Will be realistic, wake up, okay?
Yeah.
If you don't, there was a lawsuit filed, so deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay. But
It would be nice if we all stopped hating each other, but
well, yeah, I know.
It's not gonna
understand that,
happen.
But usually, once you start kindergarten,
I know.
that whole thing changes. When your kids come back, and it's like,
They've grown
how was
up,
school? How was school today? Fine.
yeah. Okay, end of discussion.
Yeah, right. It's like, and so, did you eat lunch? Was it good? Fine. And for like 6 years, the word you're going to get is fine. So, be realistic,
Yeah.
And, the bottom line, too, is, you don't run a city like you do a not-for-profit or a church organization. That is not the way it works. You have to go in there and you have to bite the bullet because you're the messenger, and too bad if they hate the messenger.
Right.
Okay, that's your role. But go in there with your business acumen and go in there with your financial acumen, or don't take the job.
Yeah.
So the whole is important, and you can call it whatever you want. You don't want to call it the whole. But call
It's
it
the
whatever
whole.
you
It's
want,
always going to be the whole.
Okay, you walk down the streets of Manhattan, there's holes on every corner, but
I
it
know.
doesn't mean the city's not vibrant and the city's not generating.
Right.
Okay, so the key is, take advantage of your leverage, and if you're not the one who's capable of negotiating, get over someone who is, and someone who can make it happen. That's where you put your consultant.
Right.
Okay, but right now, behind the scenes, what would you tell everybody? And I have so much more I wanted to talk about. Okay, but right now, behind the scenes, you're the camera, you're the eyes for the people.
Yeah.
Knowing that you have to capture as much as you can for them because they can't really comment
Right.
with interaction as much. It's more controlled than the climate is supposed to be. But I'm just saying, but you're limited. How do you decide what to grab? How do you decide, if you do, how do you decide this is what they need to know?
It's really challenging because there's so much happening. And I'm there to record the meetings. So the camera is mostly on whoever is speaking at the time. But where a lot of the action is in the group sitting in the room. Mm-hmm. And it's how to switch from there to there in a way that's not just deliberately provocative, although sometimes I confess it is, and grasp enough information so that anybody who's watching can see other things happening.
Right.
Little people chit-chatting in the corner, and knowing that in previous council meetings they would have been screamed at for that.
Okay.
But because they're actually part of previous council meetings, somehow it's not a problem.
Understood.
But I think that the council is so busy working on whatever they're doing or trying to figure things out, they don't even see what's happening out there a lot of the time.
So they're not paying attention as well to the interaction of the people.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, you know, I have a lot more. So could we do one more round of having you back?
You're trying to get me into big trouble, aren't you?
No, not at all. It's not trouble. It's just the facts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's important that there's transparency, and it's important from what I'm hearing from all the people who are speaking to me and coming up to me and really liking this show and saying, you know, hey, we're actually getting information, straight talk.
Yeah.
And it's important, and it's not anything devious or anything at all. It's facts. And we want to find out
It is
what's
important,
going on.
and I wish there were other ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that kids, when they go to school, were getting information that encouraged them to participate, that they were encouraged to feel that their observations and their thoughts are important.
That's important because I have been reached out and asked to come into the schools and speak to them, and they were following me when I was the mayor. They would say, we
Yeah.
watch your mayor's updates and we really are involved,
Yeah.
and they would come to my meetings. And so this is something that is trickling down, and I think people are appreciating your being here because they are following what you're saying, and they are saying, you know what, the people need, how do we do it? How do we do it?
Right.
How do we do it? And take it out of just a little handful of people who want to direct the conversation or control the storyline.
Right.
So I think we need to put our heads together, and I think we need to get the community involvement. As I said, you know, as the women's commissioner, I've been working on that. We're going to change. That's going to be a force of change.
I hope so.
I'm
really hope
really
so.
psyched about that.
Because Lord, do women need to wake up.
And I'm psyched about that last meeting and the next meeting coming up and then getting out there. I'm really psyched about the directives that they're taking now.
I mean, if your next show is going to be talking about things like that, about really getting people involved and active,
yes.
I'm happy to do that.
That's exactly what we're talking about. We're done with this stuff. Now
Thank
we're going to
goodness.
talk about, I mean, now it is what it is. So,
Yeah,
but
I know.
now it's, those facts are out there, they have some
Yeah.
information, but the key is, now how do we get the people
Yeah.
to not only get involved, because we know they want to be involved,
Right.
but realistically where it makes a difference.
And that they're not just struggling with survival
Survival.
issues themselves.
Good.
How do we still be part of change? Because it takes more than 1, 2, 3 people.
There you go. And that's where we're going on the next
Okay.
round. So come on back next Monday, Pam Lads, and we're going to talk about how to effectuate change. How does the community really get involved and not feel like they're surface involvement?
Right.
How are they truly involved? Not activists, not holding signs. We're not talking about that.
Well, I do that too. I'm good with that.
But that's not what this
No,
is
I know.
about. This is about really, you want to be on a task force? Well, you know, you don't get to be on a task force that's control. You
Right.
get to be on a task force because you believe there's going to be an outcome
Right.
that is a desirable outcome that you participated in. Even if it's something you didn't want, you were able to participate with being fully informed.
Right.
And that's what we need to figure out. So that's where we're going. So thank you, NEK-TV. Thank you, Pam Lads. And this has been Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan, and we will see you next week.